for you in Military?
Well, in his head, during that time I was, living with a friend, and of course, day to day, Sunday, basically, on call all the time.
Gloria Brown put on a much more convincing performance than Buddy Fisher, and it really seemed like the team at McDonald's had bought into her story and believed she was a genuine winner.
Back and forth.
But while Gloria was able to maintain her composure, our Buddy Fisher was anything but composed during his train wreck of an interview.
You want to take a little sip of water?
Yeah, like dot your real head too. That's why I'm kind of paying attention to that over there.
Now, had your wife or anyone in your whole family ever won anything like that before?
No.
Never?
Nothing.
So this was big.
Huge.
So you're the luckiest one in your family, huh?
Yes. Yes.
So has any of your kids or grandkids played Monopoly or tried to win or anything like that?
Yes,
Play?
we still do.
Oh, good.
And we still do, yes.
Have any of them won any cards or?
No. I think I want a cheeseburger.
It seemed like Buddy and Gloria were able to get through their interviews without completely blowing their cover. And props to Buddy for making it all the way through without having a heart attack. Although he may have had one after he found out that this entire interview was a trap.
FBI! Fast food and fraud. The FBI today arrested 8 members of a fraud ring accused of rigging several years' worth of cash giveaways at McDonald's.
In the background, the FBI had been conducting wiretaps, but to build a strong case, they knew they needed evidence on video. So they set up a fake winners reunion, baiting their suspects into telling their fabricated stories with an all-expenses-paid trip to Vegas.
Ron and I will see you in Vegas. Thank you, Mike Donald.
But these weren't the only fraudulent winners on video. The FBI had prepped interviews all across the country.
Thanks, McDonald. Hey. And the second one I peeled off was $1 million instant prize winner. It was like, wow, is this for real?
Got a lot of these people locked into lies about how they won.
Gloria, do you remember the McDonald's where you went to claim the prize?
Hilton Head in South Carolina.
This is a picture. We took a picture of it. And she said, oh my God, that's exactly the way. And I said, can you autograph that for us?
It's you to Detroit. Thanks, McDonald.
Thanks a million.
Oh, that's good. Thanks a million. And then sign it. That'd be great.
But this wasn't even the McDonald's in South Carolina. This was a random McDonald's in Florida. But Gloria signed it anyway, not realizing that it would later be used as evidence.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Now what I want you to do is take us through I got my $1 million and I took it to this McDonald's in Hilton Head, South Carolina.
Thanks a million, Mike Donald.
Okay, look right in the camera, say it, okay?
Thanks a million, Mike Donald. And she's so proud. She's good.
In one massive scheme of their own, the FBI managed to gather all the evidence they needed to put an end to this entire conspiracy. All the dots had finally been connected, and the crimes of everyone involved were now going to be exposed for the entire world to see.
Well, this story is going to make a lot of people angry. Prosecutors say it appears McDonald's customers never really had a chance to win the biggest prizes.
So the McDonald's monopoly scheme had finally been put to an end. The winners were forced to pay back what they stole, and their names were spread across nearly every news channel in the country.
William Fisher and Gloria Brown both live in Jacksonville.
Robert Lisa Colombo took part in the nationwide scheme to steal the game winnings.
McDonald's was devastated by the news, while a stunned spokesperson for Parker Brothers had only this reaction.
And as for the infamous Uncle Jerry,
He was not at his Lawrenceville home today. The man neighbors here have jokingly nicknamed
Oh, the hamburger.
the Hamburger was inevitably handed a go-to-jail card, but it wasn't Jerry Colombo that was sent to prison for defrauding the McDonald's Corporation.
The Hamburger is very clever and very sneaky. We found out that there was another Jerry involved in this, named
Jerry Jacobson.
The FBI says 58-year-old Jerome Jacobson was the ringleader who
Stole them, passing winning game pieces to his friends, who then recruited others to come forward and claim the big prizes.
This was the real mastermind behind the McDonald's monopoly scheme, and the person who really went by the alias Uncle Jerry Jerry Jacobson had met Jerry Colombo in 1995, and after a long discussion, he decided to make Colombo his primary distributor.
What did you think when your Jerry Colombo, first mentioned this whole thing to you?
Okay, he called me from New York and he told me that Uncle Dominic introduced him to this guy that was in charge of this thing. To him, this thing was a job.
The deal went as follows. Jacobson would sell Colombo one of the $1 million pieces for an upfront payment of $50,000. Colombo would organize a third party to redeem the prize, and he'd collect about $500,000 over the next 20 years. A much better deal for Colombo, assuming he was able to stick around for the next 2 decades. Remember that first ticket Colombo claimed? Well, he never should have taken this ticket, and some believe his fate was sealed the moment he took the ticket to that red Dodge Viper.
Jerry Colombo won a Dodge Viper.
So I guess we'll never know how many tickets Jerry Colombo distributed.
Because of the death of Jerry Colombo, the FBI couldn't prove that these people were involved or not.
The only person who could shed light on this topic was Jerry Jacobson. So this next part is his side of the conspiracy.
First, let me underscore the fact that Jerome Jacobson was not a McDonald's employee. He was, in fact, an employee of Simon Marketing, which was the firm that McDonald's had contracted to administer its games.
So Simon Marketing was responsible for distributing the winning Monopoly tickets.
Jerome Jacobson took the winning tickets while working as head of security for the company that ran the game.
It was a series of unfortunate events that would lead Jerry to becoming the McDonald's Monopoly Hamburglar. And his villain origin story began in Youngstown, Ohio.
He was raised without money.
A popular McDonald's in Youngstown announces it's closed its doors for good.
He never felt worthy of money, and he felt like he played second fiddle to Marvin because Marvin was getting the financial support.
My name is Marvin Brown. I live in Miami, Florida. Jerry Jacobson is my stepbrother. Yes, he is my stepbrother. We were friends, but we're not brothers, if that's the word you want to say.
Jerry's mission in life was never money or power, but purpose. And it was his purpose to learn the truth about the McDonald's Monopoly promotion. However, at a younger age, without the proper guidance, the mind of this young man was easily persuaded.
So what makes a joker like you want to join the United States Army?
Sense of purpose.
I like you.
I was too easy. He knew he had me, and so by the next day I was sworn against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
But Jerry's days in the military had an expiration date. In fact, he never went on to complete his basic training. Jerry learned that he wasn't cut out for the military. However, it wasn't his aptitude or dedication, but a genetic condition in both of his feet that would eventually get him discharged.
Students in total to complete more combat missions.
Get the fuck out of here.
But he wasn't robbing McDonald's just yet. All of these trials and tribulations would just make for a much better story, because eventually he'd find purpose at the Hollywood Police Department.
Congratulations on passing the detective's exam and welcome to the Special Investigation Unit.
In an alternate universe, Jerry may have gone on to have a fulfilling career in law enforcement.
His dream of life was always becoming an FBI agent.
Agent Stuckey, FBI.
But we know that the Jerry from our universe was always going to become the McDonald's Monopoly Hamburglar, and his villain origin story would suddenly come into fruition when he was diagnosed with it.
Mr. B presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 52nd presidential election in American history took place on November 3rd, 1992.
Read my lips.
Yeah, George H.W. Bush had alienated most conservatives by straight up breaking that pledge. I mean, man, he tried, but
but he ended up having to give in and compromise with the Democrat-controlled Congress. Plus, the economy went back into a recession, and yet Bush remained popular with the majority of Americans. After the United States and coalition forces kicked butt in the Persian Gulf War, his approval rating got as high as 89%. This likely helped Bush get the Republican renomination, with Dan Quayle again as his running mate. However, it's worth noting that Pat Buchanan, a journalist and former advisor to Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan, challenged Bush and put up a good fight. Buchanan's main beef with Bush was the fact that he raised taxes. The Democratic Party again had several candidates interested in their nomination. None of them had run for president in the last election. Senator Al Gore would have, but his son was recovering from a horrible car accident, so he decided not to run again. One of the candidates who ran was Bob Kerrey, a senator from Nebraska, who I am only mentioning because I had a fantastic conversation with him when I used to live in Omaha. But yeah, he couldn't gain any momentum. The leading three contenders were Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, and Paul Tsongas, a former senator from Massachusetts. Despite the fact that several scandals seemed to follow Bill Clinton no matter where he went, including a scandal that alleged he cheated on his wife, Hillary Clinton. Have you heard of her? His charm won over most Democrats. Clinton became the nominee, and he asked Al Gore to be his running mate. Back in February of 1992, a billionaire businessman named Ross Perot appeared on Larry King Live to open the possibility of running for president, despite the fact that he had never held public office before. Soon after, a huge grassroots movement swept the country to get Perot on the ballot in every state. Getting on the ballot in every state was a big deal back then for a third-party candidate, and it still kind of is. James Stockdale, a war hero and former prisoner of war in Vietnam, was Perot's running mate. By May, Perot was the front runner, leading over both Bush and Clinton in the polls. However, by July, the establishment media had been regularly attacking him, and he didn't know how to handle it well. He was, after all, getting attacked by both Republicans and Democrats. There were also internal issues within his campaign. And then, in July, almost seemingly out of the blue, Perot dropped out of the race. To this day, it remains a mystery why he exactly did this. He later explained it was to protect his daughter, but that still seems like a weird excuse. His supporters felt betrayed. Flash forward to October, and all of a sudden, Perot said he was back in the race. He qualified for the presidential debates, and it was only the second time a third-party candidate was allowed in a televised debate, the first being John Anderson back in 1980. However, these debates were extra special because it was the only time in American history where three candidates all got to debate each other at the same time on TV, and the debates were exciting. This was a classic three-way race. Really, supporters of all three candidates thought their candidate had a good chance to win up until the end, really. Clinton and Perot attacked Bush because of the lagging economy. Clinton remained a charmer, but critics pointed out character flaws. In addition to allegations of cheating on his wife, Clinton was criticized for dodging the draft during the Vietnam War and smoking marijuana.
And I didn't like it. And didn't inhale.
Oh, how the times have changed. Ross Perot, despite being a billionaire who spent tens of millions of dollars of his own money to run his campaign, ran as the outsider who wanted to end crony capitalism and defeat the special interests in Washington. Perot stood out as the only candidate who criticized NAFTA. He could never regain the momentum he had back in the spring, however, distantly in third place behind Bush and Clinton in the polls right before Election Day. And here are the results. Bill Clinton won, becoming the 42nd president in American history. He received 370 electoral votes and 43% of the popular vote. George H.W. Bush finished second, receiving 168 electoral votes and 37.5% of the popular vote. Ross Perot finished third, receiving 18.9% of the popular vote, but no electoral votes, as his support was pretty consistent across the country. It was the best third-party performance in the popular vote since the election of 1912. Al Gore became the 45th vice president in American history. Clinton was the first Democrat since Jimmy Carter to become president. He united Democrats across the country with his centrist or third way views. Clinton became the poster boy for a new group of Democrats that became known as the New Democrats. You know, kind of like the New Kids on the Block, who appealed a lot to people who had moderate views. Republicans blamed Perot for being a, quote, spoiler, but there is no evidence that backs this up. Perot did influence the race, however, as Clinton made it a priority to balance the budget after he became president. Really, the Republicans should have blamed Bush for losing this election. He had the lowest percentage total for a sitting president seeking re-election since William Howard Taft, also in the election of 1912. He also had the lowest percentage for a major party candidate since Alf Landon in the election of 1936. I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
Mr. Truitt? Question to President Reagan. Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and casting it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were retired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. That it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
Mr. President, I'd like to head for the fence and try to catch that before it goes over, but I'll go up to another.
what you see nearly every day.
For the next 90 minutes, you asked this evening, that's to respond.
If you know that I proposed the death penalty during all of my life, I don't see any evidence that this is a deterrent and the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, while we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America.
Wix is your platform to perform on.
You can be frustrating yourself with thinking how technocratic. Governor, is a narrative fairly or unfairly for Michael Dukakis that he's too much of a technocrat?
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis,
Bernard, I think you know that I'm
In all, the fact that his wife was used as the example of the question and instead talked about the issue itself that they came upon himself as a life work, that it was that he totally seemed to not be nonplussed by the idea.
But we have work to do in this nation. We have work to do to fight a real war, not a phony war against drugs, and that's something I want to lead, something we haven't had over the course of the past many years.
Voters choose it for very different reasons. Some people were all about the smart. Some people was gut care. Some people just look and think, does this person represent everything that America is, more than America should be in some form or another? So there's always a different reason why people vote for certain people and why they discount certain issues. But that was a moment that was a reminder that many voters aren't looking for an answer. They're looking for a gut check for whatever that is. And Michael Dukakis failed a gut check for a non-voter.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and pick up exclusives. Thanks for watching.
chemotherapy intensive helps follow through, which as previously established has a potential to cause problems. And also the American government was much less optimistic when it came to the outcome. Especially since the Vietnam War.
I know, I looked and considered. Any of these classes. You know, I used to think Geraldine was spelled Jeral-DEAN. That'd be a really unfortunate name for a woman.
Geraldine.
Gerald-Dean.
Somebody spells this.
Is that,
Well, maybe you could call them Jared Hall.
what?
Jared Hall. That was the supplement that used to be the corporate spokesman for the Lawrence Welk show.
I've heard of that show.
You never watched
The Lawrence Welk? Yeah, were you telling me about that? Okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
What was that we were watching? We watched both.
Oh, you were, it was you. I remember you telling me about it. We should watch
He was a band leader in the,
Oh.
I'm not sure, in the 80s, he retired. Not sure when he died, but he was very popular, especially in the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Lawrence Welk.
He was from North Dakota.
Wow. That's pretty cool. 2 seconds.
She was here.
Dude, it was so hot in that room, bro. I think you say that every day, could you sleep through that? No, sometimes it's cold and it's unfair. Like, does anybody have any questions? I'm like, why can't Taylor stay awake? That's my question.
Sometimes it's cold and it's very difficult to sleep.
I know, that's the unfortunate thing.
It'd be better if it was warmer, then it would be easier to sleep.
Exactly. Sometimes it's just not optimal.
You should bring all your stuffed animals along.
Bring all stuffed giraffe.
Your stuffed bat, your stuffed box of popcorn.
I can bring you my stuff. Purple unicorn.
Do you have that with you?
No. I can do it.
Maybe that's why you can't sleep tonight.
You can imagine me making a slide down the main street with my grandma's house.
I can imagine. How old are you?
Younger than 10.
So what is?
It's alright.
What is the purpose of this?
I just handed the very small rock for an illustration in this lesson.
Oh, cool.
Did you like have to hold it up or something?
How did you do it? No? Every time you mention the little rock, you?
No, he just had us hold it up twice.
Okay. I feel like that'd be a good, audience member in your class.
Yeah, so when you're preaching this sermon and someone asks me this one.
That would be ridiculous.
All the kids would love it.
Actually, the adults would probably love it too, they just wouldn't admit it.
It'd be funny.
That would actually be hilarious.
We're doing this in school, so everyone hold on.
We're looking at the rocks. Am I internship this summer?
It's like Earth's stress balls.
Oh, yeah. Hold up your stress balls, everybody. Squeeze them tight. Good job.
But if you had one, you could just pretend and you could just be fishing instead of sleeping.
Honestly, I still have that worm, I should just bring that worm.
I have one. It's fishy.
Oh, your little dog shooter? So cute. We still have them?
It's right here.
Take it over there. Yeah, he's probably in the room. You want him?
We can have any plans.
Not as long as Yeah, baby.
Yeah, it does. She does. It's actually called Sushi Bar.
He's gonna make sure it's not sushi bar. I don't accept that. I don't, actually. Unless you can name your kid that, you should name your dog that.
Okay.
Could you name your kid sushi bar? Really?
Taylor, I do not like these games that I have to play for science class.
It's not 9 out of 10.
What science, what games?
You have to like label the systems. They're very challenging. No, where did they go? She was 11.
Okay, so I'm setting. Here we are, okay. Okay, so we are going to hopefully finish out the material here of the 1980s today. Then next week, we have the Clintons, and then the modern day, right up until whatever happened in President Trump's trial next week. Maybe he'll be in jail by then, who knows? So let's have prayer and we'll pick this up and deal with the election of 1984. I would say I remember the election of 1980 very well, but 84 was definitely one that I remember. I will graduate from high school in 1990. Bush will win in 88, but this election I really remember and paying attention to it. So let's pray. Father, we do pray for your special presence, grace, and help in this class. And we pray that you would have your hand on each of our lives and that you will guide us as we seek your help in everything that we do. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, now, what we remember here is that Geraldine Ferraro was selected as the vice president in order to bring some pizzazz to the ticket. Walter Mondale expected to need to have some gimmick to make his campaign seem more exciting. Now, she was a credible person, so it's not as though they went out and just found anyone who ticked the box is a woman or whatever. She was a member of Congress and had credibility. But I believe that if the vice presidential nominee had been Martha Lane Collins, who was the governor of Kentucky here in at that time, he might have done better. He couldn't have done hardly any worse. Reagan, during the campaign, stumbled in his first debate, and age became an issue. Then Reagan declared in the second debate that he would not, that he would combat this issue. Reagan celebrated America's strength and prestige in the world. There was an ad of a bear in the woods, walking around like the Soviet Union. Some people do not, some people don't believe there is a bear. Other people say the bear is tamed. Should it not be our job to be as strong as the bear? That was very scary. And people began to say, yes, we need to have a strong military. We need to be as strong as the Soviet Union. He will win 49 states, all but the District of Columbia and Walter Mondale's home state of Minnesota. Now, during the second debate, the issue of age was brought up. Let me deal with the sounds here. The sound is so touchy on this machine because it can be so loud, as you might know. I may have to deal with it this way. I cannot reach this on my own.
Out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history. Some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience. That it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
I'd like to get to the fence and try to catch that before it goes over, but I'll go on to another.
So that, Walter Mondale said in his memoirs that although he was laughing on the outside when Reagan said that, he was also crying on the inside because he knew that he had just diffused the whole issue of age, even though it was still real. And there was nothing more to be said about that. Reagan will win, as I said, a 49 state overcoming this deficit. There are several things that will happen in the second term. One, he does make deals with the Soviet Union. The deficit spirals out of control. Soaring deficits from 90 billion in 1982 to 283 billion. I tell you what, I would love if the federal deficit was only 283 billion. We spend more than $1 trillion a year that we don't spend. Now, you know what? If you tried to count to 1 billion, if you wanted to count to 1 billion, do you know how long it would take you counting one number every second? A very long time. About 31 years. That's 1,000 billion. Now, how long would it take you to count that? A very, very long time. We just go through money like, it's almost unimaginable how much money it is. The trade deficit increased from 36 billion to 8 in 1980 to 170 billion in 1987. Deregulation and downsizing of American business. This man, Ivan Boesky in the top picture, made millions buying and selling companies and turning their profits into junk bonds, which he cashed in, and many times destroying the companies. In 1987, there was a major stock correction. Wall Street lost 13% of its value in just 1 week. FDIC insurance increased to 100,000. Now it's 250,000. So if you have more than $250,000 in any one bank account, then you need to start looking around for other places to put your money. Deregulation of the thrifts led to reckless speculation and the government liability of almost 500 billion. That was during the next president's term. And the economy shifted employment to companies downsized to remain profitable. Over 450,000 jobs were lost in big companies. Employment patterns, jobs shifted from manufacturing in the Rust Belt of Ohio and the Mid-South. Labor unions' loss of market share and strikes were at an all-time low in 1995. Now, we're moving into the next campaign. The Democrats are hoping that they can defeat President Bush. But after the Reagan time in office, there were a lot of Democrats who were running. One is this gentleman by the name of Gary Hart. Now remember, Gary Hart was in the last presidential election. He drops out. He expects he's going to win this time. He is the senator from Colorado, and I have little nicknames for each one of them. Now, Gary Hart is Mr. Monkey Business because in a precursor to Bill Clinton, he was found to have a romantic tryst with a woman who was not his wife on a boat named the Monkey Business. So there was some monkey business going on the Monkey Business. And as a result, he dropped out of the race, even though he was the early front runner. He will then get back in the race later on, but he is not able to recapture his momentum. The next one is Joe Biden, who was named Plugs because of his hair transplantation that he had to cover up his bald spot. Mr. Plugs Biden, he ran for president first in 1988. And the current president, yes. But he dropped out of the presidential race in 1988 because he was found to have been plagiarizing a speech from a British Labour politician. You can't believe half the things he says. His uncle was eaten by cannibals in Papua New Guinea. I don't know if that's true, if there are any descendants of current Papua New Guineans whose ancestors ate the president's uncle. But he has all kinds of stories, and one of them was that he used a speech from a British politician to describe growing up in coal country. He did grow up in Pennsylvania coal regions, but he just took that speech and made that story his own. He also was found to have plagiarized his law dissertation when he was in college. So because of this, he was forced to drop out of the presidential race in 1988. Then Al Gore, I don't have a picture of him. Al Gore was trying to become the youngest president in history. He withdrew after coming in third in the New York primary. Then we have Jesse Jackson, who is still alive, but he was always good at making rhymes. So he is down with dope, up with hope candidate. And he was the choice among many liberals and African Americans, stayed in the race all the way to the convention, hoping to become the vice presidential running mate. And then Michael Dukakis, who will eventually become the nominee. He was the governor of Massachusetts, eventual nominee, who was wooded on the campaign. And he selected conservative Texas Senator as his vice presidential candidate. And he was a classic liberal, soft on crime. Crime became a major issue. He was against the death penalty. He was willing to let people out on furloughs. He was also seen riding around in a tank with a funny-looking hat on that kind of hurt his campaign. But the big thing that really hurt his campaign was during the first debate.
It could be frustrating to some who think, how can a debate turn on that? But it fed into a narrative, fairly or unfairly, for Michael Dukakis, that he was too much of a technocrat.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor?
Just by the way, Kitty Dukakis was his wife. And so this is the question. If Kitty Dukakis was raped and murdered, would you favor the death penalty for the person who did that?
An irrevocable death penalty for the killer.
Some debate moments are less about the substance and more about the passion or lack thereof in an answer. And nothing to me jumps out more than what happened with Governor Michael Dukakis in '88.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I proposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America.
Governor Dukakis answered the substance of the question, not referencing at all the fact that his wife was used as the example in the question, and instead talked about the issue itself. But it came across to some, perhaps as robotic, or that it was that he totally seemed to not be nonplussed by the idea.
But we have work to do in this nation. We have work to do to fight a real war, not a phony war against drugs, and that's something that I want to lead, something we haven't had over the course of the past many years, even though...
Voters choose him for very different reasons. Some people are all about the book smarts. Some people want a gut character. Some people just look at it and say, does this person represent everything that America is, or that America should be in some form or another? So there's always a different reason why people vote for certain people and why they discount certain issues. But that was a moment that was a reminder that many voters aren't looking for an answer. They're looking for a gut check for whatever that is. And Michael Dukakis failed a gut check for enough voters in that moment.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out.
Now, many women were upset with him because he seemed so unemotional. But for a classic liberal, It don't matter if it's my wife or someone else's wife. The answer ought to be the same. If he's like, hey, if it's my wife, the person should die, then what about the other person's wife who's actually killed, raped, murdered, or whatever? So at least he was consistent. But that created a huge problem for him. The Republicans, Bob Dole from Kansas, won the Iowa caucus and provided a strong challenge to George Bush. But eventually, George H.W. Bush, vice president under Reagan, wins the nomination. The use of negative ads by campaign manager Lee Atwater helped him win. And Bush's performance in the interview with Dan Rather, when he fought back against Dan Rather and nearly got him fired, that was also a big help to his campaign. He was found to be feisty and full of energy, and no one expected it. That really helped him as well. Then he selects Dan Quayle, the Indiana senator, as his vice president, who was known for gaffes and bloopers, including failing to know how to spell potato. But Bush will win with Bush will win with 53% of the vote. Campaign centered on the Reagan legacy, crime and punishment, especially with Willie Horton ads, and the response to the question, as I mentioned, by Michael Dukakis on the death penalty. One of the reasons why George Bush, I believe, will lose 4 years later is because Lee Atwater, the person who orchestrated his negative ad campaign, dies of brain cancer before the next election. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush was the son of a Connecticut Senator, Prescott Bush, attended Yale University and joined Skull and Bones Society, which his son and Bill Clinton and John Kerry were all members of. Became the youngest fighter pilot in the Pacific during World War II. He was shot down by the enemy and was rescued out of the water. He made a fortune in the oil business in Texas. He served 2 terms in Congress, ran unsuccessfully for the Senate, and lost to the very man who eventually will be Michael Dukakis' vice presidential running mate. Was instrumental in building the modern Republican Party in the South by creating the modern Republican Party in the South, in Texas. He served the nation in appointed positions. He was ambassador to the United Nations, our first ambassador to China. He was director of the CIA and chairman of the Republican Party. Became vice president under Reagan, was hoping to be vice president under Ford, but wasn't. Reagan believed that Bush was the most prepared president in American history at the beginning of his presidency after serving 8 years as vice president and being in Congress and all of these appointed positions. Now, Bush's domestic policy. He held the line in the home front. The savings and loan bailout prevented him from tackling the budget deficit. He made a pledge not to raise taxes during his nomination, but found that promise impractical. Believed that a modest tax increase would correct the budget deficit. This created an opportunity for Newt Gingrich to attack Bush and begin the new Republican ascendancy on the right. Signed a tax bill that raised income taxes as well as other federal taxes. Confronted by environmental disasters like the Exxon Valdez oil spill that spilled oil into Prince William Sound there in Alaska. The drug problem was confronted by law enforcement and interdiction. Some other social issues. Abortion was a divisive issue. Big Tent Republicans wanted diversity in the party on this issue. The next big case after Roe versus Wade on abortion is Webster versus Reproductive Services of Missouri, and it provided for abortion restrictions in public-funded hospitals. And the Weber case also is famous because it said that women had to prove that the state's restrictions on abortion were an undue burden on them. And the question then later on, the IOP decision later on would ask the question, is that undue burden universal? So like there's a certain standard that every woman is entitled to this degree of burdenless access to abortion, or is each individual woman required to prove that the rules in their state are for them personally a burden? And if each one has to prove it individually, by the time your lawsuit goes all the way to the Supreme Court, you might have the baby. So that's another question. Today we have a very different standard, but that is how it is growing at this point. David Souter was appointed to the Supreme Court as a strict constructionist, but was found to be a disappointment by conservatives. David Souter was supposed to be a person who would hold the line on abortion and other things, but he was found to be a liberal once appointed. The next person who was appointed to the Supreme Court is this man, Clarence Thomas. He was to replace Thurgood Marshall, who was a who was the first African American on the Supreme Court. This was very all in, an attack to destroy this man, Clarence Thomas. On the very last day of his confirmation hearings, a distinctly conservative African American judge, Anita Hill, came in and testified that Clarence Thomas had sexually harassed her, not by touching her, but just talking about things she found inappropriate while they were working together earlier in his career. Thomas accused some Democratic senators of conducting a symbolic lynching of him. He was confirmed by the smallest vote total of any judge in modern times. He was confirmed by a vote of 52 yes to 48 no. It was a travesty. Now, he is still on the court, and he is still concerned. Democrats hate him because of his very conservative views on the court. Then, the end of the Cold War. The first democratic elections in Russia were held in 1989 since 1917. And at that time, a nationalist uprising took place in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Poland then voted out the communists, and Gorbachev said the Soviet Union would no longer interfere in its neighbor's government. And therefore, they were willing to let the countries do as they please. East German Chancellor, Erich Honecker, became aware the USSR troops would not come to his defense. He opened the border to the west on November 9th, 1989, and the Berlin Wall was broken through, and you can see here is when it is happening, on November 15th, later on that same month. In October 2nd, 1990, Germany unified two countries, East and West, coming back together. The capital of Berlin was made the unified capital of the whole country of Germany. Germany entered NATO in return for a commitment for the retention of American troops in Europe. Bush went to Moscow to sign the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, reduce both countries' militaries. Communist hardliners will then capture Gorbachev while he is on vacation in Crimea and tried to overthrow the country. I remember watching this event take place on television. It was scary. We weren't sure what would happen. Boris Yeltsin and legislators resisted them. Boris Yeltsin at this time was the president of Russia, separate from the Soviet Union, sort of like governor. But he resisted them and Gorbachev was returned to power. But by December of 1991, the Soviet Union died. It actually died on Christmas Day. Gorbachev gave a Christmas present to the world by resigning as president of the Soviet Union and would then see the Soviet Union disappear. All of the states of the republics of the Soviet Union would dissolve and become independent nations, such as Ukraine, Belarus, and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all those stands. They all became independent countries. Not Afghanistan or Pakistan. They were independent, but there's a whole bunch, Uzbek, and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. Those are the stands that were in the Soviet Union. And then you have Russia, and then you have Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Belarus, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Those are the republics of the Soviet Union. I don't think I missed any. Then, the New World Order. The China puzzle. This actually will happen, this event with the China puzzle happens before the fall apart of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev is in China visiting with the Chinese communists, and there's some attempt of reconciling the two communist nations. They had had a falling out earlier in the 1960s and were somewhat enemies. So, while Gorbachev is there, the whole world's media has descended on China. And there in Tiananmen Square, there was a spontaneous student uprising. And this person, who no one knows who he is, stood out in front of the tanks that were coming in order to stop the rioters. And he would jump back and forth, trying to prevent the tanks from coming in. And eventually, the tanks do leave. At least while the CNN cameras were broadcasting around the world what was going on. They even made a papier-mâché goddess of liberty modeled on the Statue of Liberty. After the CNN, went off the air, the American media signed off, Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader at that time, ordered the military to oust the protesters, and over 7,000 people were killed there in Tiananmen Square. And after this, no idea of openness or has been seen in China. They have become a bully and a thug nation. Policing the Caribbean. Organized elections were held in Nicaragua, that the Sandinistas lost to Violeta Chamorro. She was the leader of a more democratic Nicaragua. Now, the Sandinistas are back in power again, but the Sandinistas are now democracy-loving people and are friendly with the United States. He created peace in El Salvador, sent the Marines to Panama to protect the canal, which we still operated, as Operation Just Cause. And after President Manuel Noriega, this is the president of Panama here, refused to honor the results of a presidential election that he did not win, we went in there to set things straight. Noriega will flee to the Vatican embassy where he asks for asylum, and he will eventually be captured and sent to the United States, where he was tried on drug charges as a drug runner and exporter of drugs to the United States. And I think he died in prison somewhere in Florida. This operation made the country feel proud of itself. Then, the big deal, Operation Desert Storm and Shield. The Gulf War. The Desert Shield was when Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait to acquire its oil fields. President Bush put together a coalition of Arab and Western nations with Chinese and Russian support to invaded Saudi Arabia to liberate Kuwait. So we didn't really invade Saudi Arabia, they invited us to come. But we went to Saudi Arabia, then liberated Kuwait. And this is really when the Cold War ended, when the United States and the Soviet Union cooperated in ousting Iraq from Kuwait. Then Desert Storm, which began January 15, 1991. I was here at KMBC during J-Turn. It was the very first time that Mountain Gospel Radio, wasn't called that then, WMTC, was on the air 24 hours a day, the night that this happened. I can remember being fully aware that this was a big deal. Congress authorized military action on January 12th. The 15th, the invasion began. After a month of air assaults, on January 24th, the ground assault started with 550,000 coalition troops. It was British, French, American, German troops, plus all kinds of Arab countries. The only country that was not involved was Israel. Iraq did attack Israel during this war, but Bush asked them not to respond. He was afraid that if the Israelis attacked Iraq, that could break up the Arab coalition that he had put together. Over 100,000 Iraqi soldiers were killed in the liberation, and only 136 Americans were killed. The Iraqi government, on their way out, set over 650 oil wells ablaze. This did create some local environmental damage. We brought in a famous oil man from Texas, an expert in putting out oil fires, to help them deal with this situation. They eventually capped the wells, and the Iraqi oil industry was saved. Saddam Hussein repressed opposition from the Kurds in the north, the Shiites in the south, who expected to receive American aid in their revolts. But they did not. And that was because George Bush said that he did not have a war aim of ousting Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq. That will be his son who will take care of that later. But only liberating Kuwait. And since they accomplished that, they would not have done anything else. Now, the election of 1992. Bush seemed unbeatable following the Gulf War, but the conservative revolt and economic recession will eventually prevent his re-election. Bush was challenged by Pat Buchanan in the New Hampshire primary and would eventually come out on top. But Buchanan, who had always been somewhat of a conservative firebrand, was discredited within the Republican Party. Democrats wanted Mario Cuomo to run. Now, they were hoping that he would run. And there was actually a plane gassed up and ready to go to fly him to run in New Hampshire on the very last day. And eventually he wouldn't run. Everyone was sad. Then there was former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas, who spoke with a lisp and a New England accent. Two things. He spoke with a lisp and he had a very strong New England accent. Unfortunately, he could not get traction because people couldn't understand what he was saying. Then Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, was the eventual nominee, a former Rhodes Scholar and Yale Law School graduate. At 32, became the youngest governor in the country in 1979. He married his classmate Hillary Rodham, a lawyer who worked on the prosecution of Richard Nixon when he was being impeached back in 1974. He identified himself as a new Democrat who rejected the liberalism of Mondale and Dukakis, believed the economy would be key to victory in the campaign. Clinton was dogged by allegations of womanizing and his opposition to the Vietnam War. Then there's another candidate, Ross Perot. He was a billionaire, independent candidate. He entered the race and challenged both parties, dropped out during the Democratic convention, trying to throw the election to Clinton. That's my opinion. And when he re-entered the race for the very purpose of preventing George Bush from winning. Both Bush and Perot were from Texas, and I think there was some personal beef against him. Now, Bush did not campaign with much gusto, believing the country would eventually vote for him. Others thought that his thyroid was acting up and he was low on energy. Not sure exactly what his problem was. One of the big problems he had was during one of the debates, he looked at his watch like he was trying to see if he had an appointment to get to. And that caused people to think that he really wasn't interested. He seemed out of touch with the pain of the American people because Clinton was willing to say, I feel your pain, in the debate. Let's watch a description of this campaign. I might need to adjust the sound.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 52nd presidential election in American history took place on November 3rd, 1992.
Read my lips.
Yeah, George H.W.
He
Bush
should not have said that.
alienated most conservatives by straight up breaking that pledge. I mean, man, he tried, but he ended up having to give in and compromise with the Democrat-controlled Congress. Plus, the economy went back into a recession, and yet Bush remained popular with the majority of Americans. After the United States and coalition forces kicked butt in the Persian Gulf War, his approval rating got as high as 89%. This likely helped Bush get the Republican renomination. with Dan Quayle again as his running mate. However, it's worth noting that Pat Buchanan, a journalist and former advisor to Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan, challenged Bush and put up a good fight. Buchanan's main beef with Bush was the fact that he raised taxes. The Democratic Party again had several candidates interested in their nomination. None of them had run for president in the last election. Senator Al Gore would have, but his son was recovering from a horrible car accident, so he decided not to run again. One of the candidates who ran was Bob Perry, a senator from Nebraska, who I am only mentioning because I had a fantastic conversation with him when I used to live in Omaha. But yeah, he couldn't gain any momentum. The leading three contenders.
Now, one little fun fact about him is he only has one leg, because he lost a leg during Vietnam, in the Vietnam War.
Were Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, and Paul Tsongas.
Oh, and by the way, he would also be the future governor of California because he was the former governor and then he would get back in later as governor of California.
A former senator from Massachusetts. Despite the fact that several scandals seemed to follow Bill Clinton no matter where he went, including a scandal that alleged he cheated on his wife, Hillary Clinton. Have you heard of her? His charm won over most Democrats. Clinton became the nominee, and he asked Al Gore to be his running mate. Back in February of 1992, a billionaire businessman named Ross Perot appeared on Larry King Live to open the possibility of running for president, despite the fact that he had never held public office before. Soon after, a huge grassroots movement swept the country to get Perot on the ballot in every state. Getting on the ballot in every state was a big deal back then for a third-party candidate, and it still kind of is. James Stockdale, a war hero and former prisoner of war in Vietnam, was Perot's running mate. By May, Perot was the front runner, leading over both Bush and Clinton in the polls. However, by July, the establishment media had been regularly attacking him, and he didn't know how to handle it well. He was, after all, getting attacked by both Republicans and Democrats. There were also internal issues within his campaign. And then, in July, almost seemingly out of the blue, Perot dropped out of the race. To this day, it remains a mystery why he exactly did this.
I gave you a reason. I believe he did it during the Democratic convention. He did so at the time to give Clinton the best possible chance of leapfrogging Bush. When he knew he probably wouldn't win outright, he didn't want Bush to win. So his goal was to defeat Bush, not to win the election.
He later explained it was to protect his daughter, but that still seems like a weird excuse.
Yes, he said that the Bushes were going to attack his daughter's wedding with sabotage and make it a bad day for her, so he got out of the race to prevent that from happening. You just hire security, he's a billionaire.
His supporters felt betrayed. Flash forward to October, and all of a sudden Perot said he was back in the race. He qualified for the presidential debates, and it was only the second time a third-party candidate was allowed in a televised debate, the first being John Anderson back in 1980. However, these debates were extra special because it was the only time in American history where three candidates all got to debate each other at the same time on TV, and the debates were exciting. This was a classic three-way race. Really, supporters of all three candidates thought their candidate had a good chance to win up until the end, really. Clinton and Perot attacked Bush because of the lagging economy. Clinton remained a charmer, but critics pointed out character flaws. In addition to allegations of cheating on his wife, Clinton was criticized for dodging the draft during the Vietnam War and smoking marijuana.
And I didn't like it, and didn't inhale.
Oh, how the times have changed. Ross Perot, despite being a billionaire who spent tens of millions of dollars of his own money to run his campaign, ran as the outsider who wanted to end crony capitalism and defeat the special interests in Washington. Perot stood out as the only candidate who criticized NAFTA. He could never regain the momentum he had back in the spring, however, distantly in third place behind Bush and Clinton in the polls right before Election Day. And here are the results. Bill Clinton won, becoming the 42nd president in American history. He received 370 electoral votes and 43% of the popular vote. George H.W. Bush finished second. receiving 168 electoral votes and 37.5% of the popular vote. Ross Perot finished third, receiving 18.9% of the popular vote, but no electoral votes, as his support was pretty consistent across the country. It was the best third-party performance in the popular vote since the election of 1912. Al Gore became the 45th vice president in American history. Clinton was the first Democrat since Jimmy Carter to become president. He united Democrats across the country with his centrist or third-way views. Clinton became the poster boy for a new group of Democrats that became known as the New Democrats. You know, kind of like the New Kids on the Block, who appealed a lot to people who had moderate views. Republicans blamed Perot for being a, quote, spoiler, but there is no evidence that backs this up. Perot did influence the race, however, as Clinton made it a priority to balance the budget after he became president. Really, the Republicans should have blamed Bush for losing this election. He had the lowest percentage total for a sitting president seeking re-election since William Howard Taft, also in the election of 1912. He also had the lowest percentage for a major party candidate since Alf Landon in the election of 1936.
Okay, now, when I was, here, let me pull, yeah, here we go. When we took our trip to Arkansas, we went to see where you can mine for diamonds. Joy's stuffed animal was stowed away in my little carrying case. But we also visited in Hope, Arkansas, the birthplace of the 42nd president, William Jefferson Clinton, which is William Jefferson Clinton birthplace, home, National Historic Site. Way too many words. This is inside his house. That's some of Bill Clinton's toys growing up. His mom's sewing machine. There is the pantry with some of their dishware. There's Joy working on her Junior Ranger belt there on the floor of his mom's, Virginia Kelly's bedroom. And that's their bed and things. She liked very much using makeup, lots of makeup there. I don't think it's her original makeup. There's Berwin in Bill Clinton's bedroom. I'll go back. I'll go back to this before you leave. This is Bill Clinton when he was a baby. And this is the award he won for being the handsomest baby in Hope at a fair. And this is the outside of the house. It's been restored by the National Park Service. There's across the street, nice little house where he grew up there in Hope. Well, now we're at the Purple Cow getting supper. Which is a very interesting little place to eat. There's a whole chain of Purple Cows in Arkansas.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did I sit?
She